Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. I'm here with my co-host Walter Dial, CPA, tax partner at GRF CPAs and Advisors in Bethesda, Maryland. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building sellable business value and for planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that's sellable and then exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. In growing your business and building value, if you're like most small business owners, you've had questions at some point or another about when and how to bring on debt. And not only the question of when to bring on debt, but again, how to bring it on and how to gain confidence in making the decision with all the different options that are available to you, or maybe not available, regarding taking on debt to fund growth. And so that's our topic today, how to confidently take on debt to fund your growth. Our guest today has many years of experience in helping business owners do just that. Jenn, founder and COO of 1 Degree Capital here in the Washington, D.C. area. Jenn and her husband, Rod, have many years of experience. Jenn, 18 years of experience in business financing, having directly served over 5,000 clients throughout the nation, not just here in the area, but throughout the country. In 2010, Jenn co-founded 1 Degree with Rod to better serve the financial advisory needs of business owners. And they would say, Jenn and Rod and 1 Degree Capital would say, there is a wrong type of capital, and there are definitely wrong times to seek it. And unfortunately, for some business owners, that realization comes too late, often at great expense. And that's where Jenn and 1 Degree Capital add value. They help business owners sort through the dozens of financing options available to figure out which route is going to be best.
Hi, Jenn. This is Walter. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you with us. As you probably know, in the work that Pat and I do, we focus on servicing clients to help them grow and build business value and then execute a successful exit from their business. And there's a number of different situations where taking on debt can come into play for us as we're helping them grow the value of their business. And what Pat and I are concerned about most, and business owners should be also, we kind of look at 3 questions when it comes to a client determining whether or not debt is appropriate for them. Number 1, we want to make sure that they're taking on the debt for the right reasons. We want to make sure the timing is right for them. And of course, we want to make sure that they're getting the best possible financing terms. So with so many options out there these days, it just seems like it's really difficult for a business owner to determine what's best. What kind of suggestions do you give them as to what they should be looking for?
That's a great question, Walter. And Walter and Pat, thank you so much for inviting 1 Degree to be a part of your podcast. It's look through the topics and have listened to some of these podcasts. It's great information that you're putting out there to the business owners. And I think having this type of a forum where they can get that kind of in-depth information that's delivered right to them whenever they're having time to listen to it, especially sitting on the Beltway. It's a great time to listen to podcasts.
Thank you, Jenn. We appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very helpful. So, but Walter, you're right. It's when you're looking at the types of debt that you can take on now. It's not like it was kind of back in the day. It used to be that if you had a business and you needed funding, you went to your bank. You said, "Hey, I need X," and probably 8 times out of 10 you got it. and it just was really never an issue before. There's been a lot of changes, some very recent, but some has kind of been building up over the past 20 years or so, where it's just made it a much different landscape now, to where there are a lot more considerations when you're looking at, okay, I need to take on debt. Where do I go get it? What's the best for me? Couple of those things that we see happening, and especially a lot more rapidly lately, it used to be back in the day, there used to be over 14,000 banks around the country. And there weren't that many branches. So typically, and I'm talking back when they started counting banks in the 1930s was when they really, for obvious reasons, they started counting banks going, wait a minute, where is our money? But they had about 14,000 banks starting then. And that stayed the same through about the 1970s. We had about 14,000 banks. Not a lot of branches. Most of the time when you walked into a bank, it was that location, and all the decisioning, everything was made there. So you literally could walk in, talk to the president of the bank, who was a decision maker, and be able to find out, hey, I need a loan to do X for my business, and talk it through, look at some things, and you would typically get it. Banking regulations and the changing environment has changed that. There are now, the number of banks started declining in the 90s. And we are now, instead of 14,000 banks, we're now fewer than 5,000 banks around the country. The reason you don't notice that at much is there are almost 90,000 branches. So even though there's still literally a bank on every corner, the decisions aren't being made there. I'm actually talking to you right now from, we're here visiting a client in Pittsburgh. Oh, they'll never let me forget that. in Pittsburgh. And I was walking down the street, and I kid you not, there is a bank branch that's on the corner. And we looked inside. There's no one in there. All that are in there are video pods, pod rooms that you can go and live video chat with a teller who's located in another state. So decisions aren't being made on the corner. That's a little extreme. I've not seen that trend. Hopefully that's not a trend that will continue for long. But that's kind of the gist of what's happening. Decisions are tougher. They're not being made as locally. And that has a definite impact as far as what your options are these days. So when we're looking at that, it's okay. So how do you, given that, how do you know? I think your question was, how do you know what you're getting is at the right reasons, at the right time, at the right terms, and kind of breaking that down a little bit. If we look at, okay, so I need funds for my business. The first thing you want to look at is yes, what are those reasons? And as you mentioned, Walter, it's not just associated with the acquisition. You want to, a lot of this is you need funds to fuel your growth, to get where you're trying to get before you sell your business. When you look at those reasons, what we take our clients through when we look at them is the type of need that you have. Are you looking at a short-term need, an intermediate-term need, or a long-term need? Short-term needs, typically that type of capital is going to be like credit cards, using a line of credit, anything that generally you're going to be paying off within 30 days. So that's a really short-term need. Sometimes there, could be reasons where you need to fund something for a few months. But that's really it. It's a really short-term need. Intermediate-term needs are things that say, if you're having to make a purchase that has a useful life of, say, 3 to 7 years. So it's something that's going to be around a while. It's going to be longer than a year. So it's potentially going to be an asset listed on your books. But it's not, it's not a building. It's not going to be around for forever. When we're looking at those, we'll tend, for purchases like that, we'll tend to have our clients look at more term loan options that are usually 3 to 5 years in length. Car loans are a great example of that. Longer term needs, those are the real estate purchases, acquisition funding. If you're buying a company, those are things that will have longer term needs. And those, we will also look at options for, okay, what are some real estate backed options that we could do that has terms of 10 years or more.
So in regard to the short term, intermediate term, long term needs, is there, in there, do you in one degree spend more of your time in one of those niches or spaces than the other?
Yeah, it's a great question. No, we're all over the place with it because what we'll look at in general, it's best to match the reason for the need, the funding, whether it's short term, intermediate, or long term. It's usually best to kind of stay in the lane. Short term funds. Okay, we want to look at lines of credit, or do you have the right credit card options? That type of thing. There's always the trick part of that is there's always exceptions. We have a client right now who, as we were looking at options, they're opening up a second location. And as we were looking at options, we were able to phase the project in such a way that they could fund it with short-term capital, just repeated. So they would do short-term capital in phases versus doing one long-term financing arrangement, even though on paper and as you look at everything, it's a second location that you're doing. It would be typically a long-term option. The reason he chose to go that route was some of the other pieces that go along with long-term funding. It ties up your assets. There's a lot of other pieces that go along with the trade-off of getting that long-term funding. And he didn't want to do that. He and his wife didn't want to have that as part of it. So it's a great question. Those are the kind of general reasons for getting funding, but we will look at, for each individual business, we'll look at all of the options, and we won't throw anything out the window just because it doesn't fit the typical time frame.
Yeah, and you know what, we business owners, baby boomer business owners, if you look at the statistics, they're overwhelming almost as to how many baby boomer business owners there are and how many want to exit in the next 10 years and how Gen Xers and millennials oftentimes don't want to own a business, let alone buy a business that a baby boomer has built. So there's going to be a lot of sellers, not a whole lot of buyers for these businesses, and so third-party buyers. And so hence, many of the baby boomer businesses that have been built are going to end up needing to be sold to insiders, either key employee groups or children. And I'm just wondering, do you guys get involved, you in one degree, do you guys get much involved with internal sales, insider transactions? And first off, do you get involved with it? And then when you do, if you do, what's that look like?
We'll get involved with it to a point, looking at what's the best structure, and we'll have some input on that. We very much believe that one advisor isn't going to have all your answers, so we focus on the banking and the capital planning. There's financial advisors, there's exit planners that are well versed in those types of, like, if you're looking to do an ESOP or that type of exit strategy. We will look at the components of how your growth capital and how that will all play into it and how it will factor into it. And then we'll work with those advisors to help come up with the right strategy for you.
Yeah, terrific. Okay. So then for the right reasons, what about the right time? Walter also asked that question, the right timing in regard to. Great
question. I'm a big fan of, if you have a business, chances are you've read Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits, at least, if you're a business owner, probably at least 10 times. But one of his habits in there is begin with the end in mind. And I think that, when you're looking at the issue of timing, I think that plays a big role in it. Timing can be anything from, one important factor, especially for those listening to this podcast, would be, timing of, if you're taking on debt for operations or for an acquisition or anything, you want to look at how close is this to your planned exit from the business. Because the closer that is, the more those covenants of that debt will play a role in that exit.
Yeah. Hey, Jen, can you give an example of that? That's a great point, because this is this is what we do is we help these owners plan for their exit. And of course, a big piece of the exit is how they're going to grow and build value.
Yeah, there's and we've seen some unfortunate surprises. There's loan covenants can definitely play a role. If you have a business that by its model is heavily dependent upon its line of credit, and the line of credit covenants do not allow for a transfer on ownership. That's something to keep in mind. You can also have, if you have term loans, say you purchase some key assets for equipment for the business, and you have them on a 5-year term loan, and 3 years into it, you're selling the business. In some of those term loans, the paperwork does not allow for assumptions, even on a business ownership transfer. That will call the note and make those due and payable, and that is not a surprise. You want it at the closing.
Right. So if we had one of our clients in front of you, and we were getting your help and thinking through financing on a number of different levels, and this was one of the areas where the client, they wanted to exit in 5 years, and actually 3 years. 2 years ago, they wanted to exit in 5 years. 2 years have gone by. They have a couple of loans like that, or maybe one with covenants like that. What is there standard advice or general advice you might give an owner like that to where they can get themselves in a situation that's going to be more attractive to a potential buyer in regard to those loans that aren't assumable currently?
Yeah, absolutely. And the standard advice of any advisor is, well, it depends. No.
Yeah.
I hate that. I hate that when people say that, but it does to a point. It's the first thing is be armed with information, know what you're dealing with. So when you have a client who is looking to exit, the first thing to do is to pull out that original paperwork and let's take a look at it and see what we're dealing with, see what the options are. If there's not a problem, then great, you don't need to worry about it. If there is a problem, if it looks like it's something that is onerous and you may not want to deal with it at closing, then we'll look at options for possibly refinancing. A lot of times we will make initial outreaches to those creditors, and depends on the creditor, but sometimes there's some willingness to allow for those things to happen, even though their paperwork says no, we won't do this. So we'll when we work with our clients, we'll always look for that path of least resistance and least cost. So obviously the least resistance and least cost is going to be make what you already have work. If that doesn't happen and we need to look at options, then it's okay. Let's look at what these options are and evaluate those from there. But refinancing, the worst case refinancing would be something we would do. It's possible too, if you're just a couple years left in it, is it something that you could pay off from cash flow before you get to closing? And that has pros and cons as far as how that looks on the cash flow when you're trying to sell, but it's something worth looking at as well.
Hey, Jen, let me ask you something. So if a business owner decides to work with you and your company, how does that affect their relationship with their existing banker?
Oh, it's a great question. We can sometimes make bankers squirm in their seats.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah, but again, back to look, the best way. We are firm believers in we don't make change for change's sake. A lot of times when we work with clients, the first thing that we look at is where are they banking now? What needs are being met, and what are their needs that aren't being met? And is it possible that bank has the solution they're looking for? They're just not aware of it. And we see that happen. Quite frankly, we see that happen a lot, where it's just their account may be so old that it's just kind of always been set up the same way from when they started the business. And they've never really taken a good look at it. And, meanwhile, their bank has evolved or possibly changed ownership, has 2 or 3 different names on the marquee now. And there's other options that are out there that they just weren't aware of. So we won't make change for change's sake. If it's possible to work with their existing bank, we will absolutely look at that as an option.
Okay. And then 1 Degree Capital, how are you compensated? Are you like a consultant? You're billing them a fixed fee or an hourly rate, or is there some other fee structure?
Yeah, good question. It's so we are fee-based. We're fee-based advisors. The client pays, the business pays our fee. And that's important because we are not a broker. We're not a commissioned lender. So when we're working with clients, we have a fiduciary relationship with that business. So if we introduce them to a bank, if we introduce them to any type of a lender, it's because we honestly believe that that's the best setup for them. That banker, that lender, that whoever that is not compensating us in any way for that referral. And that's a very unique relationship. It's not one that we've seen. It's not one that's out there. And we've seen it as something that, especially in this environment when there are so many options, it's something that's sorely needed, because right now, every business owner, when they're talking with bankers or lenders or anybody, every one of them has a product they're trying to sell. And of course, they're going to try to convince that business owner that their product is the right one for them. We're sitting on the same side of the table with the business, evaluating those options and really helping them determine what is best for their business.
Jenn, along those lines, what's a typical client, in regard to size, business? Most of the businesses that Walter and I are working with and trying to help are $25 million and less in revenue. What is your sweet spot, if you will?
That's it. Our sweet spot is typically we want to see someone who has at least 1 to 2 million in annual revenue to start with at the low side. If they're under that, we've worked with businesses under that, but there are fewer options. Our whole goal is to help you evaluate your options. If you're newer than that and have lower revenue activity, it can be a little more difficult to hone in on what are the best options. So really our sweet spot is kind of that, starting at 1 to 2 million and then up to about that 20 to 25 million mark. Once you get over that, there's the banking is at a different, you're not quite to mid-market, but you're getting close to that. It's a different set of criteria. We have some great resources for those types of businesses, but really our sweet spot is that 2 to 25.
And so, Jenn, what about other lending options? You've mentioned options a number of times, and of course, banks are going to be an option. Are there other options that you're thinking of or referring to that are not banks?
Sure. There's a number of non-bank or alternative lenders that are out there that they have their place. I think there's, I think it depends on there's that word, it depends on the situation. but we don't discount someone just because they're not a lender or they're not, a bank. We also truly leave no stone unturned. So we've actually, the first thing that we do when we're taking on a new client and they say that they have, a lot of times they'll come and say, I need X amount. The first thing that we'll look at is do they really need that amount? We've had a lot of clients that have come to us who, claim that they need, a large working capital loan or a line of credit. And when we start to dig in and look at their financials with them, we can help them uncover ways that they don't need to take on as much debt as they think they did. And that helps them enormously, because obviously if they're not taking out that much debt, they're not paying that much, they're paying less in interest, they're paying less in fees. And that helps tremendously. Again, that's the advantage of working with us, where we're trying to get that business the right option, not necessarily the biggest loan to close on. And that happens more often than not. So we'll look at, the first thing we look at as an alternative to a bank loan is, do you need as much as you think you do? Are there other ways around what you're trying to do? We also look at we've had some clients where we've come up with options for, if they're product based, sometimes we can help them come up with ideas for maybe pre-selling services, and or even creative like that. I'm trying to think of an example without giving. We're very guarded about our clients' stories, but we do have. So one example is we had a client who we were looking at their annual planning, and they knew that in one quarter, I think it was the third quarter, they were going to have a cash flow shortage. And so they were planning on, originally when they came to us, they wanted, they were in Q2, and they wanted to get a working capital loan to get them through Q3. When we looked at it and took them on as a client, the option that we came up with was for them to basically offer a sale to their Q4 clients who normally would be paying then, to get some of those to pay during Q3 instead of waiting until the end of the year. And they incentivized their clients to do so. The incentive that they gave them was less than what they would have paid to have a short-term loan. So it worked out better for them in the long run, and they wound up never even having to take a loan. So those are the types of puzzle pieces that we look at and say, what truly are all the options? And if it is a loan, we've got lots of options within that as well. Yeah,
one of the scenarios that, with the size businesses that we're working with, oftentimes, and you know this, of course you do, any loans that they might have, they've personally guaranteed them, oftentimes. And so helping them to plan for their exit and to be attractive to a buyer, and then too, in continuing or in considering business continuity if something were to happen to them, sudden death, sudden total disability or something like that, and having the business continue, we want to see them over time remove themselves from the personal guarantee on those loans. Whenever possible. Do you have any, silver bullet ideas or any kind of advice for listeners on how to go about doing that?
Oh, wow. I tell you, that is probably the number one question that we get. Aside from how low of a rate can I get, it's the second question is, how do I not have to personally guarantee this? The short answer is yes, there are some ways to do it. It depends. The ways to do it have to do with the type of loan that you're getting. The thing to keep in mind as far as the personal guarantees is the way that the creditors look at it. A business they're looking at business continuity. So a business like Microsoft, say when their CEO steps down, the business keeps humming along. The business didn't live and die by that owner, so he doesn't have to personally guarantee the loans. When you're talking about a closely held company, and by closely held, typically that's fewer than 6 owners, and typically 10 million and under, although that fluctuates as far as the dollar amount in revenue. But the definite ownership, when there's 5 or fewer owners, that is typically considered a closely held company. And if one business owner leaves, that can have a dramatic impact on that business's revenue. So that's the need for the personal guarantees from the creditor side. I'm not trying to justify it. I'm saying that's where the mindset of the credit underwriters is coming from. With that being said, there are some credit products that are loan products that are out there that do not require personal guarantees. It's one of the factors that will weigh when we're working with a client as far as, is it worth doing it or not? Some of the options are quite frankly more expensive because it's a higher risk if they don't have the personal guarantee. But sometimes that paying that higher risk or paying for that is worth it, especially if you've got an exit coming up and it's going to be an issue. Then it's worth paying for it to not be an issue.
How many extra points do you typically have to pay for a loan? How much more interest are you going to see on that loan if you go that route?
It's again the bad question of it depends. There are some banks that their covenants require personal guarantees, so it's not a matter of how much you pay them. In those cases, we would be looking at different types of products altogether. So maybe you wouldn't be able to get a line of credit, but maybe you have, if your business is based on recurring revenue, if you have a recurring revenue subscription model, if you have a product base and most of your clients pay by credit cards, those types of future receivables, government contractors have future receivables because they're invoicing, but they're not getting paid till later by their clients. So sometimes you can sell those receivables to be able to get cash now. Those typically, when they're involving the receivable, that's the collateral, and you're typically not having to personally guarantee those. If you're talking traditional line of credit, it's really, really difficult to get a bank to waive that personal guarantee. In most of them, it's a line in the sand.
Okay, great. So this has been terrific. Jenn, thanks so much. As we come to a close, is there any other advice or wisdom you'd share with the listeners? And also, a couple of other things. When should they consider seeking you and One Degree Capital out? And then share with the listeners, too, how they can do that, how they can contact you if they want to.
Sure. And thank you. This has been, you guys have had great questions. This has been fun. I think, look, at the end of the day, really what we're doing, we're capital advisors to businesses. And at the end of the day, we're not doing anything that business can't do for themselves. We don't pretend that we have, some secret back room where people are, we're able to do things that businesses can't do. The question is one of timing. We're looking at, we are staying in touch and staying in tune with all of the banks, the major banks that serve the DC metro area. We know what they're looking for. We know what their rates are, their covenants, all of that. We're staying very in tune to that. And that's the information that we're using to help our clients make better decisions. Can a business owner go and Google all of this and read the quarterly reports of every bank and keep in touch with it? Sure. I'd argue that's probably not the highest and best use of their time, especially if they're trying to grow their business to sell it. But that's what we're here for. So we do all of that research so that the business owner doesn't have to. So if they're really looking to find out what's the right bank for me, what's the right banking relationship, where's the right debt, all of that is something that we'll work with and will help them get an understanding of. And the best way to reach us for that is to you can visit our website, onedegreecapital.com. You can also reach us at our office, which is 703-579-6868.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jenn. This has been really informative. So thank you very, very much for agreeing to come on with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, if you want help in maximizing the value of your business or helping to plan for your eventual exit, you can reach Pat at 301-859-0860. And you can reach me at 301-951-9090. You can also access resources at exitreadiness.com, grfcpa.com, and nslp.com. Thank you for listening, and until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Walter Dial and Pat Ennis signing off.